This is Star Trek 25th Anniversary for MS-DOS, released in 1992 by Interplay to coincide with the 25th anniversary of Star Trek that took place in 1991. Oh, better late than never, I suppose. There were two other Star Trek games released around that time which bore the 25th anniversary moniker, a top-down adventure game on the Nintendo Entertainment System and an odd side-scrolling shooter thing on the original Game Boy. However, more often than not, when people bring up Star Trek 25th Anniversary in a gaming context, they're usually talking about the computer release, which originally came out on floppy disk before eventually getting an enhanced CD-ROM release, which not only added proper sound effects and even another episode of play, so to speak, but also brought together the original Star Trek crew to voice their characters and all that jazz. That last sentence probably lasted longer than the original series run, but regardless, this is the version, this enhanced CD-ROM version, that was re-released on GOG.com a couple years back, and as such, this is the version we'll be playing. 25th Anniversary is a point-and-click adventure game that comprises 7 episodes, each of which follow a fairly basic formula. You begin on the bridge of the Starship class USS Enterprise. Shut the fuck up, that's what it says on the plaque, you geek. Anyway, after a training exercise that sees you pwning another Federation starship, random Starfleet admiral will contact you, give you some exposition on the mission you'll be partaking in, and then you'll proceed to your given destination, and once there, usually after dealing with some oppressive starships, you'll lead a landing party comprising Captain James T. Kirk, Science Officer Spock, Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy, and the usual expendable redshirt who dies in the most gruesome fashions whenever you do something stupid.
He's dead, Jim.
You do not have a say in who gets to beam down. This is all you're getting. So while on the planet's surface, or wherever, sometimes it takes place on another ship and such, you'll talk to people, find stuff to use on other stuff, and basically solve whatever problem that needs to be solved for that mission. Once all is done, you'll beam back to the ship where a random Starfleet admiral will grade your performance, give you commendation points, which has some mild effect on the performance of your crew, and you'll move on to the next mission unless you do extremely poorly, in which case, oh well. Now, unlike the NES or Game Boy releases, 25th Anniversary on PC has no overarching storyline. You're not trying to make your way back to Federation space after being flunked by some anomaly, nor are you trying to assemble a proto-matter weapon to destroy a planet killer. It's just 7 standalone episodes with their own self-contained stories and their own cast of guest characters, including some old favorites here and there. You know, much like in Star Trek.
Increasingly violent.
Stay away from me!
So each episode, as mentioned, begins on the bridge of the Enterprise, where you can consult the computer database to look up some information relevant to the game or pertaining to some Star Trek minutiae. There's a considerable amount here. You can confer with Spock or hail things with Uhura, usually to remind you of where you're supposed to go, navigate to other places, or just fly the ship around the general vicinity, either by using the keyboard arrows, the joystick on your gamepad or whatever, or guiding the mouse cursor to direct the ship, which is how I usually do it. There's a little more to operating the ship, which we'll get to later. Navigation is handled somewhat uniquely here. You press the N key to bring up the navigational chart and you highlight a planet to warp to, but there is no indication as to where you're supposed to go. There's no online prompts telling you which planet is which. Now, if you stray off course by picking the wrong planet, i.e. this planet you're not supposed to go to continue the mission, and you'll have to fend off against a squadron of Klingon ships, Romulans, or Ilasi pirates. It usually depends. To determine your proper course, you'll need to consult the star chart located in the game manual, which lists the planet in question. Sort of a unique form of copy protection where you need to look up the map in the manual to progress properly, and considering the battles you fight should you veer off course will usually stack the odds against you. The only way out is through. And in terms of the starship combat, 25th Anniversary handles that somewhat competently enough with a combination of arcade and simulation aspects. Arcade in the sense that these massive starships housing hundreds of crew on board maneuver a bit closer to smaller fighter craft that are nimbler than lumbering large capital ships. But simulation in the sense that the keyboard has additional functions you could perform, raising shields, arming weapons, controlling impulse speed, directing damage control and such. It strikes that nice balance between being simple enough to grasp while being deep enough to feel somewhat intricate without being too much so. Learning to fly the ship and learning how to survive enemy ambushes is something you can and should grasp fairly quickly. Eventually, once you beam down to the scene in question, we get to the main adventure portion, where a 4-man landing party comprising Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Random Redshirt will beam down to wherever they need to beam down. Don't forget to drop your shields, or else you won't be able to transport. And this is standard point-and-click adventure fare. You're using the mouse cursor to guide Kirk on where to go, who to talk to, what to look for, what to pick up, use stuff, pull something from the inventory, sometimes wave your phaser around and get mildly amusing quotes from Bones. Sometimes when you're conversing with people, you'll be given a choice as to how to respond to whatever query you're given, and your choices naturally affect how the conversation will go. Though really all your actions have ramifications in some form or fashion, and since this is Star Trek, a more diplomatic and passive approach is heavily favored. The second episode, Hijacked, for example, involves you attempting to reclaim control of a Starfleet frigate from a group of pirates who have hijacked the ship, as the title suggests. When you get to that point, you can either talk your way out of it, or just fucking shoot at everyone on the bridge. Both may get you the desired results, but only one is befitting of a Starfleet captain and will result in higher commendation points being rewarded, which is supposed to improve your crew's overall performance, but is generally the equivalent of your overall score. Also, being nice helps, which is why you need to think and act like Captain Kirk, and less like William Shatner on Twitter, quite frankly.
You're wasting the time of a starship capable of destroying this planet with campfire stories? No wonder you were dumped out here in the middle of nowhere.
As far as point-and-click adventures go, 25th Anniversary is a pretty solid one. It's fairly simple, straightforward to figure out, controlled via mouse cursor with the keyboard reserved for command shortcuts, and entering the occasional code when prompted. The cursor will light up with a red border whenever it hovers over something you could interact with. And while the game presents few instances of losing endgames beyond, being dead or something, your choices do matter. Your action affects the episode as a whole. And the dialogue between characters is compelling enough that you just want to go back and sample all the dialogue choices for the humorous responses and such. The episodes themselves aren't cakewalks, but simple deductive reasoning and experimentation will get the job done, as they should. Star Trek 25th Anniversary graphics are pretty good for its day. The Enterprise bridge looks about as good, detailed, and functional as you could make an old 1960s bridge set look in a 1992 PC game, which I'm not ragging on. It's a fine bridge set, and there's even an option to hide the bridge and get a better view of space, which helps with the space battles you'll need to endure every so often. The various settings you'll explore are nice, detailed, colorful single-screen set pieces with occasional bits of animation tossed in. As far as the characters themselves, they mostly follow a base template in their sprite design that is slightly tweaked with different hair, clothes, and occasional facial features to make them different characters, but you do recognize the various characters by looking at them, whether it be a Spock or a Klingon, and hey, even Harry Mudd makes an appearance, but not on the view screen for some reason. He's obscured in shadows. I guess they couldn't get the rights to it. 25th Anniversary was originally released on floppy disk. I recall the sound effects for the floppy version being somewhat underwhelming, and some of these have been retained for the Judgment Rights CD-ROM version, which is baffling, but we'll get to that later. The GOG release doesn't include the floppy version, but it does include the enhanced CD-ROM version that was later released, which added the actual sound effects from the show, so you had the proper phasers and tricorder and transporter sounds in there, which adds to the overall authenticity of the product and the experience. The CD version also brought back the original cast together to voice their characters. So yes, you had William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, Nichelle Nichols, and oh my, doing voices. And while they do sound a bit softer and a bit older, probably because they were, it's a nice little thing, and you even have the option to turn off the text boxes and have this play out like a little mini episode before your screen. The guest voiceovers also hold their own at times. Whoever did Harry Mudd does a respectable Roger C. Carmel impersonation, though it's not quite the same thing, obviously. Truthfully, the only real letdown in the voiceovers is the Enterprise computer, sounding more robotic and a lot more harsher than even the computer voice used in the original Star Trek.
Commanded by Commodore Jake Aldrin. Its first officer is Commander Sasha Denard.
Music cues are fair recreations of those from the show in this MIDI-ish format of sorts. I'd imagine the sound card you had at the time would have helped as well, but whatever. They got some of it in, it sounds fine. Long story short, Star Trek 25th Anniversary on MS-DOS, PC, whatever, it's a fine Star Trek game and one that is still as engaging today as it was 30 years ago. It gets the tone of the series down to a T, the writing and stories are pretty solid, it's got the original cast doing their thing, and is a generally solid, enthralling adventure game that managed to encompass as much of the Star Trek experience as possible at the time. Star Trek games over the decades tend to be hit and miss, but this is one of the better ones. It's available on GOG.com for relatively cheap, and honestly, it's worth every penny for any Trek gaming geek to check out if you haven't already done so. This is good Trek, it really is.
Were you attacked by Romulans?
No, Ensign. It looks like the Alassi have been doing some business with them. Scotty, beam us back. We need to find that ship that attacked the Republic.
Aye, Captain.